In the late 1500s, China ruled the skies. For centuries, imperial astronomers predicted eclipses, guided rituals, and defended the cosmic order that justified the emperor's power. But one day, the stars fell silent. From across the ocean arrived a small group of foreign priests, men in black robes, carrying telescopes, brass globes, and secret mathematical tables from a world China knew nothing about. They claimed they could read the heavens more accurately than anyone in the empire's history. And unsettlingly, they were right. These were the Jesuits, missionaries armed not with weapons, but with numbers. And as their predictions proved true, the balance of knowledge inside the Forbidden City began to shift. China's ancient science was about to collide with Europe's new astronomy, and neither side would emerge unchanged. If you're fascinated by stories like this, make sure to subscribe. There's much more to uncover. Jesuit influence on post-medieval Chinese astronomy. Ancient China had seen little Western contact before the 16th century CE, the language, culture, and science all being allowed to develop independently of foreign influence. By the time European Jesuit missionaries arrived in the 16th century CE, Chinese science and astronomy were behind in terms of European technological advancement. The Jesuits eventually held important positions at Chinese institutions and introduced new texts, astronomical tables, a new calendar, and several new scientific instruments. There is also, however, some debate as to the extent of the Jesuit scholars' influence and the limitations of their own knowledge placed on the development of science in China. Science and astronomy in ancient China. Science before the 20th century CE had a rather different interpretation than that of today. Astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were all considered sciences, but their teachings and practice were not directly comparable to those of the present. Chinese astronomy, in particular, was focused on calendar studies, the study of constellations, movements of celestial objects, and astrology with the intention of predicting events that would happen on Earth. In addition to predicting eclipses and other phenomena, astronomy had key roles in timekeeping, calendric, and ritualistic functions. Studies on ancient Chinese science suggest that up till the 14th century CE, major inventions, such as gunpowder and the compass in China, meant that it was much more advanced than Europe in a technological sense. The historian N. Sivan states that, between the end of the Roman period and 1400 CE or so, a Chinese visiting Europe would have found it in many respects technologically backward. 47. By the 16th century CE, however, European science had quickly surpassed the technology and knowledge of the Chinese, and these advances were then brought into China. Arrival of the Jesuits. The first recorded European influences on Chinese astronomy resulted from the arrival of Jesuit missionaries at the end of the 16th century CE. These educated men, sent by the Catholic Church, were taught the Chinese language and culture. Arriving in China, they exchanged scientific knowledge and ideas, so as to gain a foothold within the Chinese elite with the ultimate goal of spreading the Catholic faith. This occurred at a time when Chinese mathematics and science as a whole were considered to be in a state of decline. Therefore, the Jesuits hoped they would be able to generate interest from Chinese scholars and improve their standing within the court. The Jesuits brought with them equipment and knowledge which greatly benefited Chinese astronomy, which had stagnated to the point where astronomers did not even possess the predictive accuracy of Ptolemy over 1,000 years before. Matteo Ricci, 1550–1610 CE, was the first of the Jesuits to arrive in 1601 CE, which may be called the turning point after which Chinese astronomy ceased to remain purely indigenous and began to assimilate Western elements. Nath Sharma, 348. Rixai was a scholar who is best known for introducing European scientific works into China and translating them. These included Euclid's Elements of Geometry, considered a founding text of the Western tradition that subsequently led to improvements in mathematical astronomy. He was also responsible for bringing into China modern astronomical tables, which were comparably much better than those in use by the Chinese at that time. Reformation of the Chinese calendar. A key aspect of Chinese astronomy that the Jesuits had direct involvement in was the reformation of the Chinese calendar. The calendar had a key role in almost all of daily life throughout the whole empire and was used for the planning of imperial rituals. The political and symbolic significance of calendric astronomy. The Board of Astronomy was subordinated to the Board of Rites, Petit-Jean et al. 80, meant that the Chinese were at first reluctant to allow foreigners permission to develop a new calendar. However, this feat was finally achieved by German Jesuit Adam Schall, 1591–1666 CE. In 1644 c. Schall had built on the trust previous Jesuit missionaries had earned from the Chinese emperor and his scholars, convincing them to give him permission to construct the orthodox calendar. Schall's work went far beyond that of calendar making, however. He was also responsible for bringing into China many astronomical instruments and publishing his observations in Chinese, to the point where he was arguably the most influential Westerner in the history of China. In recognition of Schall's work on Chinese astronomy, he was given the role of director in the Imperial Bureau of Astronomy. Successive Jesuits then held on to this directorship for almost 150 years, until they left China at the end of the 18th century CE. Schall's successor as director in 1669 CE, Ferdinand Verbiest, 1623–1688 CE, was the next Jesuit to play a key role in advancing Chinese astronomy. Further influence on Chinese astronomy. In addition to bringing in Western teachings, Jesuits also developed their own knowledge while in China, and these observations and calculations were written in Chinese. Verbiest published more than 20 books on astronomy in this way, including a book on the use of telescopes, others on eclipses, star catalogs, and a history of European astronomy. He was also responsible for the replacement of old instruments in the observatory, setting up new bronze-casted ones, some of which can still be seen there today. A separate group of Jesuit astronomers and mathematicians established themselves in Beijing on the request of Verbiest in 1678 CE, as he felt that more material and personal help was needed to aid the Chinese mission. These French Jesuit scholars, after some trouble entering the country, established a house in Beijing in 1700 CE that would develop into an important scientific center. The historian A. Udias suggests that, although they did not hold any official position, their work was also very significant in the transfer of Western science to China. 474. Apart from having a library and possessing scientific instruments, the French house also operated a small astronomical observatory that was used by the Jesuits to produce a collection of observations. A key figure among the French Jesuit astronomers was Antoine Gaubil, 1689–1759 CE, who wrote the first history of Chinese astronomy, which was subsequently published in France. Jesuit departure from China. The Jesuits finally left China in 1773 CE due to the suppression of the Society of Jesus, but their astronomical work was taken over by 4 Portuguese ex-Jesuits until 1805 CE. By the time they left, however, generations of Jesuits had successfully transferred many aspects of European science into Chinese astronomy. These included the teachings of Euclidean geometry to better understand the movements of celestial bodies, the computation of planetary motions, the idea of a spherical Earth and methods for prediction of eclipses. One of the most important additions was that of stereographic projections, to impose the spherical star map that the Chinese used onto a plane, which also incorporated algebraic and computational methods. Many prominent Chinese scholars by this time appreciated the usefulness of Western scientific methods, and in particular its accuracy and precision, resulting in the incorporation of Western knowledge into mathematics and astronomy in their works. The Jesuits returned to China in 1814 CE after the Reformation of the Society of Jesus and founded observatories, using them for works on astronomy, meteorology, seismology, and geomagnetism. They were allowed direction of these observatories until 1950 CE, when the communist government seized control of them. Was the Jesuit contribution significant? There are some arguments to suggest that these Jesuits did not actually bring anything new into China. The historian C. Cullen states that novel scientific methods brought from Europe were simply a development based on learning that had traveled westwards from China in previous centuries. 167. This resulted in Chinese scholars realizing that their own knowledge surpassed, or was at least equal to what had been achieved in the Western world. Furthermore, the Sinocentric Chinese believed that they lived in the center of the universe and found it difficult to accept foreign ideologies. This led to many Chinese viewing the Jesuits' knowledge and technology as an attack on Chinese claims to moral superiority, an assault on China's self-esteem. Lands. 12. Still others argue that the Jesuits were in fact responsible for holding back the development of science in China by basing their teachings on Ptolemy's outdated system. As Copernicus' heliocentric system was banned by the Catholic Church in 1616 CE, Eudius stated that the drawbacks of such teachings on Chinese astronomy were the exclusive use of ecliptic coordinates and an erroneous doctrine of the precession of the equinoxes. 475. Due to the fact that the Jesuits held such a prominent role as directors of the Imperial Bureau of Astronomy, it was not until the early 19th century CE when Protestant missionaries arrived that Copernican thought was introduced. These Protestant missionaries came from many denominations and quickly organized themselves once free trade was established in China. They brought in teachings that carried the history of Western astronomy from ancient times to the Greeks and Ptolemy, from the Middle Ages to Copernicus, Brahe, and Kepler, and from Galileo and the telescope to Newton and the Royal Society. Elman, 301, and therefore opened China up to the rest of Western science. From the time the Jesuits first arrived in China up to the communist seizure of the observatories, the contributions of many Western astronomers had been successful in incorporating European mathematical and astronomical knowledge into Chinese teachings and culture. In addition, the Jesuits' calculations and observations studied while in China led to many works being published in Chinese that further benefited Chinese astronomy. Political career. Francis Bacon was born on 22 January 1561 in London. His family had powerful connections. His uncle, for example, was William Cecil, Lord Burghley, L. 1521-598, special advisor and personal secretary to Elizabeth I of England, R. 1558-1603, from 1558 to 1572. Lord Burghley also served as Lord Treasurer from 1572 to 1598. Bacon joined the University of Cambridge in 1573. Completing his studies in law at London's Inns of Court, Bacon joined the English embassy in France, a post he held until 1584. Returning to England, Bacon began a career in politics, which would see him reach the very top of what could be a highly dangerous tree, one particularly susceptible to brutal pruning by unpredictable absolute monarchs. Alexander Pope, known for his sharp humor, once described Bacon as the wisest, brightest, and meanest of mankind. Rundle, 31. Bacon was first elected a member of Parliament in 1581. His uncle's patronage failed to secure Bacon the position of Attorney General in 1594 and 1596. Perhaps Burghley pushed too hard for his nephew since, in the end, the Queen stated she would appoint anyone except Bacon to the post. In 1596, Queen Elizabeth did appoint Bacon to the Queen's Council. Bacon ultimately deserted his famous uncle and sided with Burghley's great enemy, Robert de Vereux, Earl of Essex, 1566–1601. This was an unfortunate choice of ally since Essex soon found himself in disgrace. Fortunately, Bacon redeemed himself somewhat by helping to secure Essex's execution in 1601, and then justifying his political machinations in his apology of 1604, where he explained that his ultimate loyalties lay neither with Burghley nor Essex, but belonged, rather, to his monarch. In 1603, Bacon was knighted by the new monarch, James I of England, R16031625. More extravagant titles followed, that of first Baron Verulam in 1618 and Viscount St. Albans in 1621. In 1618, the same king appointed Bacon Lord Chancellor, but he did not hold the position for long since allegations of corruption soon surfaced. Bacon admitted his guilt, was held in the Tower of London for 4 nights, and suffered a whopping fine of £40,000, £8 million today. Fortunately, King James cancelled the fine, but with his political career in tatters, Bacon concentrated on his more academic pursuits. In these, he would be remarkably successful and influential, all the more surprising since he did not himself seriously practice any branch of science. Bacon's new scientific method. Bacon set out his thoughts on what he considered a proper scientific method in his The Advancement of Learning, first published in 1605. In Novum Organum, New Organon, published in 1620, Bacon further outlined what he thought was the correct approach to understanding the natural sciences. In these 2 works, Bacon championed the need for detailed empirical study, as this was the only way to increase humanity's understanding and, for him, more importantly, gain control of nature. This approach sounds quite obvious today, but at the time, the shadow of Aristotle, L. 380–4322 BCE, the great ancient Greek philosopher, still loomed large over early modern minds. The Aristotelian approach to scientific inquiry, what Bacon called the traditional organum, had become highly theoretical, so much so that subjective verbal arguments held sway over practical experimentation. Such verbal arguments were additionally made useless because they used imprecise terminology which few could agree on. Further, natural philosophers had become preoccupied with why things happen instead of first ascertaining what was happening in nature, so said Bacon. Francis Bacon is sometimes held as a supporter of alchemy, but apart from admiring the passion of alchemists for endless experimentation, he had no time for these pseudo-chemists either. He composed this picturesque damnation of both philosophers and alchemists. All the philosophy of nature which is now received is either the philosophy of the Grecians or that other of the alchemists. The one is gathered out of a few vulgar observations, and the other out of a few experiments of a furnace. The one never faileth to multiply words, and the other ever faileth to multiply gold. Bacon believed in the idea of progress. His personal motto was plus ultra, or further beyond, and he thought that his contemporaries were not so concerned with bettering the human condition because they were bewitched by the achievements of the past. Bacon observed that the traditional limits of the ancient Mediterranean, the Pillars of Hercules, had long been left behind as mariners like Christopher Columbus, 1451-1506, Ferdinand Magellan, c. 1480-1521, and Vasco da Gama, c. 1469-1524, had explored the globe. The marine compass and gunpowder, amongst several other key inventions, had revolutionized travel and warfare. Bacon considered these developments to have happened by chance, and so he yearned for a more systematic approach to acquiring knowledge. He imagined how much more might be achieved if thinkers devoted themselves to a new approach. Consequently, Bacon, who specifically compared himself to the pioneering Columbus, proposed a new system of inquiry, what he termed a novum organum, hence the title of his book. This approach would, Bacon argued, help build an entirely new institution of science, what in those days might better be termed natural philosophy. Bacon called this new objective his Instauratio Scientiarum, or Great Scientific Founding. All of this was not exactly new, as other thinkers had thought along the same lines, but Bacon's unique contribution was to set about creating an almost coherent package of these ideas. He ran out of time and died before his great project was complete. Bacon's approach had three essential steps. 1. Assessing existing knowledge. Not content with setting out how others should approach science, Bacon was intent on building this new edifice of knowledge himself, or at least, making excellent progress on its foundations. To start with, though, Bacon was less interested in new knowledge and more focused on surveying all existing knowledge. The fruit of this initial endeavor was the advancement of learning. Bacon did not believe all past research, ideas, and received wisdoms were still valid, and a lot of dead wood had to be chopped from humanity's tree of knowledge. 2. Experiments, tests, and data collection. In a second step, Bacon set out his new scientific method so that others would follow suit, and the existing, suitably pruned knowledge tree might grow new and impressive branches. This approach is explained in his Novum Organum. Bacon summarized the approach as going out into the field and thoroughly testing nature without any preconceived ideas. Nature had to be put under constraint and vexed. That is to say, when by art and the hand of man she is forced out of her natural state and squeezed and molded. Morin, 133. In this method of experimentation, facts and data should be observed and gathered so that there was a lawful marriage between the empirical and rational faculty. Ibid. Bacon acknowledges that testing nature is not easy, and a wise scientist should hone their skills on easier problems before moving on to more complex truths. Nevertheless, Bacon also believed that great thinkers were not necessarily essential to making leaps in knowledge, since any person with hands and eyes could conduct experiments and collect data. Further, this data should be openly shared with others conducting similar experiments, and the collated results then be systematically presented, for example, in the form of tables. Above all, and unlike the Aristotelians for Bacon, and we should perhaps remember he first studied law where facts reigned supreme. Observation and measurement should come first, theories second. Some have criticized this position since the Baconian method or Baconianism, as this approach to knowledge is sometimes termed, minimizes the use of hypotheses, which can in themselves be very useful, particularly when mathematics is involved, an area of study Bacon woefully neglected. 3. A new world. As a third step, Bacon believed that science should offer practical improvements to daily life and give humanity power over nature. More traditional approaches, he said, had neglected this crucial aspect of knowledge, making the results of research relevant to ordinary lives. Bacon set out what his new approach might achieve, that is, what our expanded tree of knowledge would actually look like. He did this in his New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1626. Bacon describes a utopian commonwealth based on an island called Bensalem. Here, there is a great and state-sponsored institution of learning, Solomon's House, named after wise King Solomon of the Bible. Scientific investigators gather data, and philosophers analyze these results so that human life be endowed with new discoveries and powers. Quoted in Burns, 27. Thus, on mythical Bensalem, science is able to provide many new technologies, including, for example, a form of telephone. Bacon was still working on his Instauratio Scientiarum at his death, writing a treatment of natural history titled Silva Silvarum, which he never completed. Bacon's major works. The most famous works by Sir Francis Bacon include Essays 1597, revised in 1612 and again in 1625, The Advancement of Learning 1605, Of the Wisdom of the Ancients 1609, Novum Organum 1620, De Dignitate et Augmentis Scientiarum, An Expansion of the Advancement of Learning 1623, New Atlantis 1626, Silva Silvarum 1627. Death and Legacy. Bacon seems to not have enjoyed robust health, and he was famously the patient of William Harvey, 1570-81657, who discovered the circulation of the blood in humans. Bacon most likely sought Harvey's advice for curing his chronic gout. The pair did not get on. Harvey once described Bacon's eyes as being like a viper's and dismissed his philosophy as nonsense. Bacon was quite willing to take non-expert advice when it came to his health. Indeed, he had singled out professional medical practitioners in his The Advancement of Learning as being particularly susceptible to blindly accepting received wisdom regarding remedies instead of seeing if they actually worked on their patients. Bacon frequently took opium-related drugs, and every week he indulged in a rhubarb purge. Perhaps he grew his own rhubarb since Bacon was a keen gardener, delighting in strong-scented herbs and flowers, and growing his own exotic fruits like pineapples. Ever the practical scientist, Bacon died in a somewhat bizarre manner on 9 April 1626. The great man was out in the winter fields stuffing a goose with snow, presumably to determine the efficacy of a novel method of refrigeration, and he caught what turned out to be a heavy and fatal cold. Bacon's philosophy took a while to grab anyone's attention, but by the mid-17th century, his work suddenly became influential. Bacon had possessed such a luminous mind and was so revered as one of the great thinkers of the 17th century that all sorts of weird and wonderful theories sprang up concerning him in subsequent centuries. The most infamous of these, the Baconian theory, which began to circulate in 1785, is that Bacon was really William Shakespeare, a claim dismissed by serious historians. It is his approach to science that really ensured Bacon's work lived on. Bacon's ideal of an institution that brought together great minds and promoted scientific research, his Solomon's House in New Atlantis, became a reality with the foundation of the Royal Society in London in 1662. The founding fellows of this society certainly credited Bacon with the idea, and they were keen to follow his principles of scientific method and his emphasis on sharing and communicating scientific data and results. Into this learned society's midst sprang Isaac Newton, 1642-1727, who ultimately became a long-serving president. Newton was perhaps the greatest of all scientists. He took Bacon's approach, through in mathematics, and came up with laws of nature like his universal law of gravity. Bacon would have admired Newton's laws since they sought to explain observable phenomena but not waste time speculating on the unknowable, that is, why they were there in the first place. Laws are not causes. They are descriptions that can be used to explain and predict phenomena. With Newton's work, science, as Bacon had envisaged it half a century before, was finally born.